But in the Depression political context, making her subjects attractive was also a New Dealer's political statement, because associating the poor with beauty was a democratic assertion. Her handsome farm workers, and this incidentally is a Louisiana portrait, could be said to argue a New Deal analysis of the Depression. Emergency relief programs, unlike earlier welfare programs, gave material aid without moralizing. They rested on the premise that the crisis was beyond the ability of individuals to cope with, that it was the economy that needed structural repair, not the poor, and that those who might appear disheveled and worn down might nevertheless have strong foundations and the capacity for recovery if they could only get a little bit of help. To subvert centuries of blaming the poor and to identify the poor as deserving required showing that they worked hard, that they maintained good morals, and that they behaved with restraint. Victims needed to be attractive if they were to evoke sympathy, not to mention generosity. There was censorship here, Lange's self-censorship. She simply did not make pictures of unappealing people. But she also made people appealing. They are all self-confident. They are all handsome. Many artists face a similar challenge, but unfortunately, I think many try to counter negative stereotypes with positive stereotypes. If you look at this strategy today, you will see how important was Lange's intense resistance to stereotypes. Come on. Each of her subjects comes to us as an individual and unique. Part of her strategy, simultaneously artistic and political, was making portraits without removing people from their environment, making individual portraits in social context. Her subjects may have been trapped, but they were not defective. They may have been exhausted, but they were always interesting. She became expert at providing context without erasing the individuality of subjects or reducing them to types. This individualization, I think, is an essential ingredient of democracy. Now, since poverty is rarely beautiful, some have argued that Lange's attractive portraits of the poor were inauthentic or even dishonest. This is another Louisiana picture that might have been designed as a high fashion advertisement. But Lange was making images not only of injustice, but also of people's potential. And the potential of these marginalized people is basic to the possibility of democracy. In this emphasis on potential, Lange's approach was not completely dissimilar to the Soviet socialist realist art of the same period. In that genre, romanticizing socialist man and woman was justified by the premise that art was depicting the socialist future and was justified by the premise that it helped build the socialist future. But fundamental to Lange's vision, I think, was something both sensory and imaginative that was entirely missing in socialist realist art. A vision of people as multifaceted, troubled, conflicted, even somewhat enigmatic. She remarked once that great documentary photography should ask questions, not provide answers. And this is the hallmark of her portraiture. We can never be entirely confident that we entirely understand these people. They retain some mystery that is the core of what makes them subjects and never just objects of pity. It is this attraction to complexity that allowed her to achieve emotional power while stopping short of sentimentality. Now, another essential part of this democratic vision was a respect for labor. Images of people actively working was a Lange trademark, and these were, of course, usually rural workers, since she was employed by the Department of Agriculture. Naturally, many of these photographs were medium or even distance views, and yet many of them share in the quality of respect and individuation found in her portraits. She was arguing that the labor of farm workers was as skilled as that of white-collar workers. When she photographed tobacco culture in North Carolina, which she did at great length, she documented every stage of the complex process, from planting through curing. She believed, furthermore, that documentary photographs needed strengthening with words, and she wrote very full captions to all of her photographs, and she actually spent most of her life absolutely furious that her photographs were never published with these captions. She would use these captions to give capsule family histories of the people that she made pictures of. The New Deal was, of course, a varied set of structures and personnel, but on the whole, it operated from a political sensibility that I call populist nationalism. Like many reform movements in the United States, the New Deal constructed American history and American character as not only politically unique, but also politically superior. The U.S. was founded in democracy, and its citizens had a special talent for democracy. But in the 1930s, this nation was still imagined in a way that excluded many, many Americans. Americans' nationalism always contained an enduring stream of racism, and this stream is not a flaw in a package of good intentions. It is often rather the very basis, the very essence of American identity, and nowhere more so than in the far West where Lange lived. In the far West, the very term American had become a synonym for white. In the far West, even U.S. citizens, if they were non-white, were literally transformed into aliens. In the far West, the majority of immigrants were not even eligible for citizenship. The Depression, furthermore, gave rise in California in particular to several giant programs of deporting or, quote, repatriating at least two of these so-called alien groups, Mexicans and Filipinos, and many of those deported were American citizens. Virtually every New Deal program and piece of legislation either excluded people of color from benefits or offered them significantly inferior benefits. The Roosevelt administration explicitly decided not to challenge the political power base of racial domination. Lange's vision, by contrast, is striking for its racial inclusiveness and diversity. This stems, I think, from three influences on her. First, her assignment to rural photography, so that she realized that essentially it was people of color who were feeding America. Second, her California location, which brought her a more complex view of American racial structures, recognizing that race in America was not simply black and white. And third, her extraordinary second husband, Paul Taylor, himself not only anti-racist, but a fervent supporter of union movements among farm workers. Lange's version of American nationalism was specifically anti-racist. One historian with more patience than me actually counted and found that 31% of her subjects were people of color. But she had no control over which of these photographs were distributed to the media. The Farm Security promoted only a very small fraction of her work, and that fraction was almost exclusively white. So a full third of Lange's photographs were suppressed and are still not published in proportion to their significance as a part of her work. But my argument about this is more qualitative than quantitative. Her photographs, I think, are attempting to draw rural people, women as well as men, into citizenship. Her migrant farm workers and sharecroppers are citizen-like in that they are deliberative, thoughtful, animated.